Howdy, folks, and welcome to the Daily Coin. My name is Rory, and I have on the line my trusted co-host, Mr. Mark S. Mann. How you doing, Mark?
Great. How you doing, Roy?
Doing all right. And as SGT Report contributors, Mark and I have been put in contact with some of the smartest people on the planet, and today is no exception. We have on the line an author, a patriot of the highest order, an operator of one of the most successful websites for any topic, survivalblog.com. Welcome to the show, Mr. James Wesley Rawles. How you doing, Jim?
Doing fine. Thanks for having me on.
And I wanted to start out. What are you working on right now? Is there anything new coming to the bookshelf?
Well, I'm working on two books, wrapping up the editing of the fifth book in the Patriot series. That one's titled Liberators. That one is set mainly in Western Canada. It should be released by E.P. Dutton on the 15th of October. And I'm also finishing up a book on tools. It's going to be called Tools for Survival. And that's coming out with a sister company of Dutton, Penguin Books. That'll be coming out in December of 2014. And my middle son, my number two son, and I just launched a new website called the Constitution First Amendment Press Association website. That's cfapa.org, cfapa.org, where we give free press credentials to any adult citizen.
Very cool. That's awesome. And that's up and running right now?
Yep, it's up and running, and people can get free credentials. Just type in their particulars and print them out. It's absolutely free of charge.
That's wonderful. I want to just jump right in, Jim. And what are your thoughts on Ukraine and Russia and the civil war that's going on over there? Do you think that that's going to grow and become something more, especially in light of Putin having his grand parade yesterday, dubbed a victory lap by one of the mainstream media outlets? Do you see any false flags coming from this, or is it just gonna? What do you see happening over there?
Well, I think it's going to be a situation where the United States government realizes that because they don't have internal lines of supply, they virtually can't be involved outside of perhaps an air campaign, and that would probably be disastrous given the state of Soviet air defense. So I think that the long-term result will be that Russia, one way or the other, will assert its sovereignty over that territory. And whether it's overt or covert, and whether it happens suddenly or gradually, they're going to be in control a couple of years from now.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, and like I said, with Putin having his grand parade, that with all of the military there, and he's right there in the middle of his high-ranking military officials. I mean, that to me was a very clear signal that, Ukraine belongs to us, period. And
yeah, it's also indicative that a lot of things have never changed in Russia. They traditionally had their big military parades on May 1st, May Day, each year. And a lot of the old guard communists still have considerable influence in the Russian government. And what we're seeing right now is a reassertion of Russian nationalism and, in effect, a reassertion of Soviet imperialism.
Yes. Once again, I couldn't agree more with that. And I think that I don't know if Putin and Obama are playing good cop, bad cop, or what's going on there. But I think that right now Putin is one of the few voices of sanity on the world stage as far as, leaders for, of different countries. I mean, Obama certainly is not, in my opinion, any type of a leader whatsoever. And he certainly, every time that he opens his mouth, he reasserts that to me.
Yeah, he reinserts his foot. Putin certainly is no prince, but
no.
He's certainly a valuable counterpole to American foreign policy under Obama. And he's certainly a force to be reckoned with.
Yes. And want to move on. And Catherine Austin Fitts has discussed on numerous occasions a slow burn, and where she believes, and I do as well, the world governments are not going to collapse. The dollar is not going to collapse, but rather a sustained, slow leaching of all the wealth from the people, thereby leaving them in a state of desperation. Those with eyes to see can see that happening all around us on a daily basis. I understand that your crystal ball is probably like mine in the shop and broken, but you, like me, have a brain and it functions quite well. Where do you see the U.S. headed over the next 12 to 18 months?
Well, if we don't see a general collapse, and there's always that outside chance, I think we will continue to see a slow slide, definite diminution of our purchasing power of our dollar as time goes on. Since 1914, 100 years ago, when the Federal Reserve got started, when the income tax got started, we have seen the value of the U.S. dollar decline by more than 90%. If they institute a cashless society with a computer-based or chip-based or card-based, whatever, currency, that basically gives all the governments the chance to have taxation by inflation as much as they'd like, because they'll no longer even have the limitation of how much printing they can do of paper currency or of how much coinage they can mint. It'll be virtually unlimited. So their ability to basically shift a decimal point whenever they'd like will exist.
Or just simply hit delete.
For mass inflation.
Yes. Or they could just simply hit delete and your account no longer exists.
I don't think they're going to want to go quite that far. They don't want a revolution on their hands. But if you look at the way the banking cartels and governments have worked in the Western world for the last 100 years, they've incrementally been robbing the people of all of the Western countries through gradual inflation. It's quite insidious, and very few people recognize what's going on because it is so incremental. But the end result is they have a whole new revenue stream. Inflation is essentially a hidden form of taxation.
Yes. Yes, it is. Mark?
Well, first I want to say I'm delighted and honored to have you with us here, Jim, and thanks for everything that you do. You've been very inspirational to me and a lot of other people in the preparedness community. And one thing I want to make a quick comment before I get into two questions for you here, and that is that one of the best things that you've done for me is put together your recommended reading list on Survival Blog. And I actually went out and got all those books and purchased them all over a period of about a year. We try to be very solutions-based here at the Daily Coin. And I think the best thing that anybody could do for themselves, if they really want to read up on practical skills and subject matter that you need to know to have solutions-type based things going on for yourself, rather than just continue to focus and read about the problems that we read about all the time, is to look at the list of books that Jim has on Survival Blog in his primary, secondary, and tertiary suggestions. He's taken a lot of the thought and research out that people need to do, and it's an incredible knowledge base. So I highly recommend that people do that.
Well, thank you for making that recommendation. My recommended book list has been out there since 2005, and based on book sales, I guess those recommendations have been good ones. A lot of the books that I have on the list, of course, are not books that I've written myself. The very top of the list, the very top of the primary list, is held by a book called The Encyclopedia of Country Living by the late Carla Emery. If there's one book that people should buy that will help their families survive in the event of an economic collapse, that's it. Again, it's called The Encyclopedia of Country Living. It's from Sasquatch Books in Washington State. And the author's name is Carla Emery, E-M-E-R-Y. I can't recommend that book more highly.
Yeah, they're probably going to be going for $50 on eBay now, Jim.
Sorry about
uh, Jim, the question I've been really anxious to ask you for a long time is how does the Fukushima event change the map for the North American readout geographically and physically?
Well, I think Fukushima is vastly overblown in terms of the radiation effects here in the United States. Because of the inverse square law, whether you're talking about airborne contaminants or radiation contaminants in water, distance buys you a lot. And even if you were just 200 miles away from Japan, the amount of radiation that you'd receive would be minimal. And here we are, thousands of miles away. The amount of radiation can hardly be measured. So I think people are horribly over concerned about Fukushima and the radiation effects, with one exception, and that being biological contamination in fish. Because of the way that fish physiology works, when a fish eats something smaller like krill, for example, any radioactive isotopes that exist in those smaller creatures end up being concentrated in the liver in particular and other organs and even the muscles of fish. So I think there is a risk, in particular with tuna and salmon, that actually migrate across the Pacific Ocean. If they're caught in American waters, they may still have some concentrated isotopes from Fukushima. So I would recommend that people look carefully at the amount of tuna and salmon they consume. And even that, though, is, I have, from what I've read most recently, is only, if you were to eat a really heavy seafood diet with canned salmon and canned tuna consumed several times a week, you'd still only get less than the equivalent of one chest x-ray over the course of a year worth of radiation. So that's the absolute worst of it. And in terms of airborne contamination or rainwater, drinking water, anything else, it's completely overblown.
Okay, and as kind of a part two to that question, I've heard you talk about this in other interviews, and I was wondering if you could discuss it a little bit here. The threat of nuclear power stations in the USA melting down as kind of one of the greatest threats that we have from any type of scenario that would leave them unattended, where we have, some 250 some odd reactors in the United States, and how long it would take if those plants, how long would it take if they were unattended, and how can you practically prepare for something like that, Jim?
Well, I don't think it's so much a worry about staffing so much it is the power grid, because unfortunately it takes grid power to make grid power. And the way the NRC regulations are written, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, if they don't have a certain level of staffing, nuclear power plants must, by law, be shut down. They must be put into a controlled shutdown. Their piles have to be scrammed, and they have to cease operation. If the power grid goes away, also nuclear power plants have to be shut down, because part of the safety of nuclear power plants is dependent upon grid power, because if they were to go offline, they would still need grid power for the circulating pumps, for their cooling ponds, for their spent fuel rods. The spent fuel rods are the real risk, not the reactors themselves.
Yep.
There's tons and tons of uranium rods that are sitting in these cooling ponds, and without constantly circulating water, those ponds will heat up, reach a boil, and boil off all their water in the form of steam within a week, and then you have exposed rods, and then you have your own Fukushima right here in the United States, multiplied dozens of times. And so the reactors that we have in the United States are actually in the eastern part of the country. And that's one reason I like the American Redoubt, is because we're not downwind of any nuclear reactors to speak of. There's a few test reactors, but certainly nothing with any large spent fuel ponds like you have in the east. So it's important to plan ahead. Go ahead.
What do you think is the minimum safe distance from a reactor, Jim?
I would want to be within 100 miles of downwind of one.
Okay.
And the prevailing winds in the United States run from the southeast to the northeast. So if you are south, west, or north of a reactor by a good distance, you're fine. If you're east of a reactor or northeast of a reactor, you've got serious problems. So again, pick your location wisely. Have thyroid blockers like potassium iodide or potassium iodate on hand for younger people. According to experts, potassium iodide and potassium iodate actually only have real efficacy for younger people. If you're over the age of 40, you're really not going to gain all that much by taking a thyroid blocker.
Wow.
And then, of course, any family that's downwind of either a nuclear target for nuclear weapons or downwind of a nuclear power plant should go ahead and have a nuclear fallout shelter.
I'd never thought about having a fallout shelter, but I mean, where I'm located at, Jim, is in Middle Tennessee, and we've got in the north middle part of Arkansas is a major, I can't remember the name of it, but there's a major nuclear power plant there, and the prevailing winds make my area put it right in the path.
Oh boy. Yeah, well, plan A is relocate. Plan B is build yourself a fully equipped fallout shelter with HEPA air filtration. HEPA is HEPA that's high efficiency particulate air filter. HEPA.
Well, Jim, I'm in the People's Republic of Connecticut, less than 50 miles from the sub base. I'm in the blast radius, so the best thing for me to do would be to smile and wait for the flash.
We'll be happy to relocate out here to the American Redoubt.
I know. I've got plans in the next year probably to separate myself from this communist regime. But I wanted to know, what is your opinion on fracking and choosing locations based on water supply? How much of that is an issue when selecting a location? How much do you take, whether fracking is going on in that state or not?
Yeah, I have really mixed feelings about it. There's obviously some concerns, but I think a lot of them are overblown. And the water quality in most of the areas that have seen fracking in terms of actual tap water has not declined. I'm more concerned with the amount of water that's required. And particularly in the western states where water is at a premium, the amount of water they need to pump into these wells is huge. We're talking hundreds of thousands of gallons per well per day. So in terms of aquifer depletion, I think that's more of a concern, especially if they're taking water from long distances and rerouting it. It could draw down aquifers in some areas just for the sake of higher oil production.
Do you think that the fracking is creating earthquakes? I've read numerous occasions.
Yeah. I don't think there's a lot of science to back that up. It may be localized, but it's not. It's certainly not going to change plate tectonics. I mean, that on the grand scale, that's what creates earthquakes and what creates your really big earthquakes. Now, locally, you might feel some little temblors, but I don't think it's a major concern because fracking does not change the essential geometry of plate tectonics. I mean, that you would take something a lot bigger than pumping water underground to do that.
Yes. Oh, and Jim, I would imagine that a lot of our audience live in some of these large scale apartment complexes. And
Mhm.
would you suggest if they live on the ground level to move up, or if they live in the upper levels to move down? And what would be, other than moving, the one thing that they should do right now to create a more secure environment for their families?
Well, in terms of their location in the apartment buildings, middle floors are actually best for two reasons. One would, of course, be physical security. You don't want to be on a ground floor, which puts you in close contact either with a street riot or with burglars. And you don't want to be on the very top floor um, because that provides another avenue of entry for someone who would do the short rappel and smash your windows approach to an apartment building. Middle floors also make a lot more sense from a radiation standpoint. If you look back at civil defense publications from the 50s and 60s, they show that the middle floors of high rise buildings are actually the safest in terms of the halving distances, the halving thicknesses of radiation attenuation from fallout. You'd like to be as close to the core of the middle of a building as you can, because that puts the most gamma shielding between you and the fallout. You don't want to be right on the top story because that's where all the fallout's going to accumulate on the roof. You want to have a lot of floors above and below you to act as shielding. So physically, the middle of a high-rise building is better. In fact, the closer to the core of the building you can get to, the better. In terms of upgrading your security, I would say concentrate on doors and windows. Obviously, if you're in an apartment building, you don't own it, you can't change the windows. But in a lot of apartment buildings, you can get permission to change your door and switch to a steel. If you currently have a solid core wooden door, you can get permission to switch to a all steel door. And as long as you paint it the same, the apartment management company will probably be fine with that if you get permission to do it in advance. And as Joel Skousen has pointed out, there's even a way to make a hollow steel door more bullet resistant by filling it with pea gravel.
Oh, wow.
Um, I haven't seen that done in an apartment, but I have seen that done at rural retreats. And it's a quite viable way to greatly increase the ballistic protection of doors. And of course, then in addition to the steel door itself, you want to hang it on 4 very heavy hinges and have it in a steel frame. And you want to upgrade it with a traditional bar across the door. And here I'm talking medieval style bar, not an angled bar like they put on apartments in Detroit and Chicago. If you increase the security of your front door, if there's a situation where there's widespread lawlessness, people are going to get tired of kicking on your door, and they're going to go down the hall to kick in the door of somebody's apartment where they can open the door more easily. Let's face it, burglars and looters are lazy. Yep. They're going to go to the easy pickings. They won't want to waste
work
a lot of energy on trying to knock down your door when it's obviously beefed up.
Yep, they are lazy and they are looking for the easy mark.
That's right.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Joel Skousen, and because it kind of segues into a question that I had for you. Joel wrote the book, The Secure Home, and of course the book that a lot of people know. Given that you have a basic raw piece of land to build on, how much do you think it would cost to build a realistic, modern, off-the-grid secure home? Like nothing like, a bunker, but I know you do a lot of consulting on this stuff. And if you had to build, let's say, like an average 3-bedroom home.
Okay. Well, if you're looking at an average property, say in the Western United States on 20 acres or 40 acres, instead of it being a $400,000 property with, say you have 40 acres and a 2,500 or 3,000 square foot house, instead of being a $300,000 or $400,000 property, you could basically figure tacking on an extra 100,000 by the time all is said and done, because between switching from wood frame construction to ICF, which is insulated concrete form, or other masonry construction to make it more bulletproof, and then adding photovoltaics and some other security upgrades, you're looking at about another $100,000 by the time all is said and done. Now, it's tough to get financing for that other than the house itself, but I highly recommend it. If you can afford it, go for it. And even if you can just move from a house that's on a major thoroughfare to a house that's on the side road of a side road and that has masonry construction, your chances of survival are going to go up by maybe even a factor of 10.
Wow.
What if you're starting from scratch?
If you're starting from scratch, the sky's the limit really on budget, but basically figure on tacking on an extra between $75,000 and $125,000, depending on how elaborate you want to make your photovoltaic system, how stout you want to build your house, and what other features you're going to want to have, like greenhouses for self-sufficiency, and a barn for livestock and for hay storage and that sort of thing.
So
but
about
generally,
100,000.
that people build, unless they're in earthquake country, that they build with masonry construction, plan on a wood stove or multiple wood stoves, including both a wood cook stove and a wood heating stove, an open floor plan so you can get that heat to all parts of your house without forced air, and then photovoltaics for your primary power system. And of course, that's going to require a pretty large battery bank, and that's going to have to be changed about once every 8 years if you're doing lead acid batteries, or once every 20 years if you do the nickel iron batteries. There's a number of companies that now make those. There's a company called Iron Edison, for example, that makes those. But generally, we're talking between an extra $75,000 and $125,000 to have a fully capable retreat. But again, location is the crucial factor. That'll be the thing that saves the most lives. It's not the actual style of construction, because you can have a veritable fortress, but if you're on a main thoroughfare, you're still going to be in the path of looters and refugees. You really want to be on the side road of a side road, way back off the beaten track, so that if there's looters that pass through, it will be your neighbors closer to the main highway that expend the firepower to stop them, not you. You want to have the looters be thinned down to small numbers by the time they ever get to you. Hopefully never get to you at all.
Hopefully. I mean, that's what my wife and I right now are house hunting, and that's one of the key factors that is creating the most issue, to be perfectly honest. I mean, to find the right house in the right location that is far enough away from a main road it's a real challenge. I mean,
it can be, and then to combine that with some of the other key factors like plentiful surface water.
Exactly.
You'd have the ideal solution, of course, is to have gravity-fed spring water to your house. That's like perfect, top of the list. Second best would, of course, have a shallow well that you can either hand pump from or pump with photovoltaics.
Yeah, and unfortunately, where we live, that neither one of those is the spring fed. That's a possibility. It's an outside possibility, but the well, that's probably not going to happen, unfortunately, because we're kind of tied to like a lot of our audience. We're kind of tied to the city, so we have certain responsibilities that we have to attend to, but we're about 30 minutes into this, Jim, and I just want to tell you how much it means to me to be able to speak with you, and I certainly appreciate all your time. I really do, and appreciate the good works that you continue to do. And is there anything that you would like to leave the audience with, as far as any thoughts or something that they should be on the lookout for?
Oh, I think that the most important thing is I encourage people to be prayerful. Choosing where you're going to live, choosing who you're going to team up with is they're important matters, and you don't enter into them lightly. I recommend that people, and people of faith, that they enter into these kind of discussions and studies prayerfully. Proceed with prayer. God will put you in the right place at the right time with the right people if you have a providential relationship with God. So get right with God and then pray hard and ask God to open doors. I do a lot of consulting for clients all over the country and, in fact, all over the world. And I'm really thankful that with prayer, a lot of my clients have been able to find some amazing properties. I recently had one client who's in your region who was able to find a property that was not only on the side road of a side road and not only had gravity-fed spring water, but it also had a natural gas well on the property with a home tap. So he had unlimited natural gas to heat his home, heat his hot water, run a generator. It's just an amazing property.
Wow.
Those places do exist.
What did a property?
It's going to take a lot to find. And again, proceed with prayer.
Jim, what did a property like that cost approximately?
Well, with the natural gas well, it actually increased the value of the property by over $100,000.
Yeah.
If you were to buy an identical property without the natural gas well, and I've got to warn folks, having a natural gas well on a property in and of itself is not the perfect solution, especially nowadays, because most natural gas companies that you would contract with now want to, instead of grandfathering what's called a home tap where you have unlimited natural gas, what they want to do is install a propane tank and have a contract where they promise to keep that propane tank full indefinitely as long as you own your property, in lieu of having a home tap, because natural gas as it comes out of the ground is not odorized, and it's a liability risk for the natural gas company because they don't want to see people's houses blowing up. Wow. They would rather install a propane tank, but of course, from a survival standpoint, that doesn't help you, does it?
No.
What you need to have is a grandfathered home tap where you have unlimited natural gas for your house.
And you need electricity to run those pumps also, right?
No. If you have natural wellhead pressure locally within a few hundred yards or sometimes even within a half mile, you can have local wellhead pressure that supplies all the pressure you need for your house. In fact, in some cases, they actually have to put a pressure reducer on a wellhead. But you have all the pressure you need for natural gas lights, for natural gas fired dryer for your clothes, for a natural gas fired generator. It's on local wellhead pressure that provides that. It's pretty much a foolproof solution.
Wow, that sounds pretty awesome, and it sounds like my wife and I.
If you're living in Kentucky or Tennessee, for example, you have a pretty good chance. One of the reasons I picked Muddy Pond, Tennessee, as a location for in one of my books was not only because it was up on the Cumberland Plateau in a fairly remote town and an agricultural town, but it's also a town where people have natural gas right in their backyard. I got to tour a sorghum mill in Muddy Pond that their whole operation was powered by natural gas. They didn't have to pay for any of the power for the sugaring of their sorghum. All the burners for those tanks, for example, all burned natural gas from a local wellhead. It was a sweet setup.
That is sweet.
Pardon the pun.
Well, Jim, if you happen to run across a Frank Lloyd Wright bunker for sale, please let me know. I'd be interested.
I certainly will. No, I do pray that all your listeners do find just that right property, and that it would be in God's providence for that their family situation and their work situation would also give them the means to be able to move.
Yes.
And because a lot of people simply just can't move because of family commitments or because of work obligations, they just can't move. My prayer is that people's situations will open up to allow them to relocate.
Thank you. We certainly need that, and I know that my wife and I greatly appreciate it because it's been very, very trying for several months now, and as soon as we get close to something, it evaporates right in front of us, and I just keep thinking that it's not where we're supposed to be.
That's right. Well, sometimes when a door closes, you got to look at that as God's providence too.
Exactly. That's exactly how I've been looking at it, because the situations in the house, apparently we're not supposed to be there because we're not, and I firmly believe that. And once again, Jim, I really appreciate all your insight and the time that you spent with us today. And
thank you so much for having me on. And again, if people want to check out my websites, they're again survivalblog.com and cfapa.org. That's CFAPA.org.
Well, thank you very much for throwing that in. I greatly appreciate it. And we will talk with you very, very soon. So have a wonderful afternoon and look forward to talking to you again.
Yes, thank you very much, Jim.
Thanks, and God bless.
Bye-bye.